what impact do you feel a yes vote would have on the age group of 16 to 25 year olds? What would you feel would be the impact on 16 to 25?
I think the most important impact would be on the outlook for their future. Because anybody who's, say, under 24 at the moment, maybe going in to do their leaving cert next year or the year after, coming out of college, their biggest problem is uncertainty. Uncertainty about what to do in terms of maybe picking a course of study, and then the bigger uncertainty about getting a job. Now, the referendum, if citizens in Ireland decide to support it, gives the government the authority or the permission of the citizens to sign up to the treaty, to the Stability Treaty. And basically, again, looking forward a couple of years, we're due to come out of the Troika IMF programme at the end of 2013. The critical thing is that if we do agree to pass the referendum, we will have access to a specific fund of money called the European Stability Mechanism of 700 billion. That's quite important because after 2013, as we exit the Troika programme, we have to basically fund ourselves on the markets, or if we couldn't fund ourselves on the market, look for someone else to fund us. And funding on the markets, the critical issue is not just the amount of funding, it's the cost of the funding. And the better marked Ireland is in financial terms, which would be very positive in terms of being able to access the ESM, then the cheaper the funding is likely to be, all other things being equal. So if we vote for this treaty, it's not that it fixes everything in terms of the economic calamity that's befallen the country since the collapse of the banks and the collapse of the construction bubble. It's more that this is, if you like, one more building block on the road to putting Ireland in a better place, which hopefully then will benefit exactly that age group that you're talking about now, and in particular gives them hope for the future and that sense of stability. I think a lot of people who would have gone into secondary school at around the time, that the collapse started, I mean, I suppose eventually people hear their parents talking about it, worried about mortgages, stuff like that. But it's taken quite a while to feed through. And now I do know, I talk a lot to students in my local schools, and I used to work as a lecturer in the GIT, so I have a lot of contact with students. And I just know they're just concerned about having a job that represents what they've qualified for. That's one thing that's sad to me. And the other, of course, in terms of Europe, is that Europe has brought a lot, membership of the European Union has brought a lot of positive entitlements. Women have done very well. Before Ireland joined Europe 40 years ago, and I'm sure most young women school students and college students don't know that before we joined, women who got married, who worked in the public services, had to actually retire. Now, that's just a piece of ancient history now. But for young people all over Europe, being in the euro, being in the eurozone, means that you're travelling in a hard currency, and wherever you go, it's much easier than when you have to go through all sorts of currency conversions. That means it's also much easier for businesses in Ireland to do business abroad because of the facility of the common currency. So putting a solid foundation under the eurozone makes a lot of sense for the future. The other issue, of course, implicit in this treaty is that the countries in the eurozone should put their houses in order in relation to debt. Now, in the long run, countries have to have a kind of balanced budget cycle. You have good years and then you have difficult years. But if you don't end up with a balanced budget cycle, what happens is you borrow money and that money is repaid by the next generation who go to work. So if we can sort out our house now, again, in general terms, it will benefit the next generation who go to work, because they will find that they've less of a burden of debt than they otherwise might have.
Okay. Do you think that young people under the legal age to vote, so under 18, should be consulted in relation to constitutional amendments that have a potential long-term impact on their lives?
Well, obviously in constitutional terms, voting age, whether in a referendum or an election, is 18 years of age. This is an item that's going to be discussed in some detail by the Constitutional Convention when that's established. And I expect that there will be some proposals in relation to extending the franchise, but I think it would be unfair to say anything until such time as the convention, actually looks at the pros and cons of doing it. And I think that the convention will have the power to consult organisations, and I'm quite sure that all of the different organisations representing young people will seek to have a serious input on that.
Okay. And as an add-on to that as well, is that something that, from ministers and the cabinet table, are they taking into account future generations when they're making decisions like this? Is that something that's done as a reflex, or is that something in the back of your minds?
As it happens, I think most people around the cabinet table have children, and I think anybody who's a parent is very conscious of the impact of any decision on their children, and that's why I would say about this referendum, voters are taking it very seriously. They're reading the treaty, people are taking time to study it, and what they have to do is weigh up the pros and cons. It's an important and for some people it's a difficult choice, but they have to try and do the best for themselves, for their families, for their children and for their community. But that's the way the cabinet approaches decisions as well. It's really no different.
Okay. Many young people have said that they're not sure how to vote, as the fiscal treaty and the referendum confuses them a little bit. So what do you feel that you can do as a decision maker to ensure that they're engaged and informed?
Well, first of all, a copy of the treaty, both in Irish and English, has been sent to every household, and I think that that's important. I've been very pleasantly surprised at the number of people who've told me they've read it, and in cases of people who haven't made up their mind, they have the treaty, they're going to read it, they're going to sit down and study it. I think this treaty is being looked at with a level of seriousness that I think reflects very well on our citizens. If I call to homes and there are young people there and they're happy to talk to me, I'm more than happy to talk to them, and I regularly speak in schools. So I've had a fair number of questions from young people. I think in this case there will probably be, as there are in every referendum and election, quite a lot of discussions by families around, it could be, around Sunday lunches, and those times when families are together. I think it's that kind of atmosphere at the moment that people are discussing it. They're discussing it with their kind of friends, with their family, with their peer group, and I think young people are doing that as well. I suppose among some young people that I've met, they still feel that technically the treaty is quite difficult. Now, to be honest, it is technically difficult. However, what happens as a consequence of the treaty is very clear. If the treaty is signed up to by us and by the rest of the Eurozone countries, we should have a much more stable euro, a framework for a more positive euro currency, which will result in the markets pricing, lending, not just to Ireland but to other Eurozone countries at better rates. And remember, in borrowing, when you're a country, it's not so much the total amount of borrowing, it's the price at which you can borrow. And obviously if the price of borrowing is very high, then you're just not able to borrow if you're a country, because the current cost of that in interest terms is too high. So that's one thing. If we stabilise the euro, that's the currency in your pocket. If somebody goes interrailing next year in Europe, or they go backpacking somewhere, they have a currency that they can use right throughout the European Union, and that's a strong currency and a highly rated currency. The second one is that for a lot of young people looking to careers and employment in the future, the big growth areas in employment, aside from the traditional areas, the big new areas are in IT, in pharma, in science, in agri-food, in scientific developments in areas like medical devices. Now, Ireland has positioned itself to be attractive to international companies in those areas. It's no accident that we have all of the major social media companies now in Ireland, because if you get one such company, other countries tend to follow because of the reputation of the country. I think that if we were to say no to this treaty and, if you like, withdraw somewhat from being a central member of the Eurozone, I think that that would bewilder a lot of those American and international investors, because one of the reasons they're picking Ireland is because we're very well educated, very employable, hard-working young people, particularly because a lot of these industries really concentrate on employing young people. We know how to deal with international and American companies in particular. Socially, we're very compatible with them. Thirdly, we have attractive corporation tax rates. And fourthly, we're a member of the Eurozone, and increasingly international companies see themselves as global corporations in which they have strategic presences in zones. So for instance, you get social media companies in Ireland, or you get companies like IBM in Ireland, you get PayPal. A lot of these are in my own constituency,
Yep.
so I know a lot of these companies, since they arrived in Ireland. And they may want to employ 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people, and Ireland then becomes one of the key hubs of their European presence. That's very positive for us for a number of reasons. Firstly, there are jobs in that. They're high-level knowledge economy jobs, and the knowledge economy is where we're, as it were, going to make our prosperity in the future. The other thing is that once you get these kind of companies, you attract other companies, and because a lot of small SMEs in Ireland then end up supplying, working with those companies, doing consulting for those companies, you get a very big spin-off, so that for every one job that you get in a multinational investment, you often get 2, 3, 4, 5 jobs downstream, particularly if we work that well by promoting SMEs. So I see it quite positively in investment terms. I know as well that the Irish managements of almost all of these multinational companies are strongly arguing for a yes vote, because they have to pitch that Ireland continues to be a strong focus point for such investment, and if a company then is going to expand and have another cycle of investment in Europe, they're pitching maybe against another, they could be pitching Dublin and their operation in Dublin against maybe a city like, it could be Madrid, it could be Paris, and almost all of the managers in those companies strongly advocated a yes vote, and I think they've done that because they see it as being a positive contributor in a series of positives as to why those companies invest in Ireland. Long term as well, I think countries in Europe have to deal with the debt issue, and if we vote for this treaty, we will over the long term begin to sort out our debt problems. In addition then, we have access to the ESM, the 700 billion special fund, some call it a bailout fund, that's there as a backstop or a firewall, however you care to describe it. And again, that will help Ireland access the markets more easily when we exit the current Troika arrangements.
And David asked, why did the government decide to hold the treaty referendum on a Thursday when it will potentially reduce the ability for students to vote?
Well, I think that on balance, the Thursday was selected by the Minister for the Environment and Local Government as being the best available date. I think as well the evidence tends to show that levels of voting are not particularly affected by the day of the week, but traditionally Thursday and Friday are voting days in Ireland, and the Minister made that recommendation to the government and the government accepted it.
Okay. And with voting levels in the referendum usually down between 40 and 50%.
Yeah, I'm beginning to feel now, I've been out canvassing particularly over the last 3 weekends, and I think that the voting will actually be high enough. I've noticed that people are particularly affected by what's happened in Greece and very concerned. Sorry for people in Greece and for what they see on their TVs about Greece, that should happen to a country that's the cradle of democracy. And people would have learned that in school. I'm pretty anxious that Ireland doesn't follow that road. So I must say this weekend, as events in Greece have unfolded, there's a lot of people of all age groups just very worried by what's been happening in Greece, and I'm feeling very concerned about it.
And do you think there's anything that politicians in general can do to encourage that youth vote, so that 18 to 25, that traditionally maybe don't come out as often at referenda time?
Well, in my experience, as somebody who's been involved in numbers of referenda and also in elections, I personally think that voting is very related to your family tradition of voting. So when you go to a polling station, and as I often do, you meet a mother or father with their children with them, and they're bringing them in to vote. And I can remember going to vote with my mother when I was a kid. I can't ever remember voting with my father, but he probably didn't vote till late at night because she was at home in the daytime. I just think that experience of going voting with your family, I think families that vote together vote. This is
from Andy, who's one of our volunteers with SpunOut. And Andy was concerned about the structural deficit. So he's worried. So if Ireland fails to meet the deficit of 0.5%, he is asking how the fine by European Court or the ESM or any other mechanism as a punishment, how would that potentially benefit the Irish people, or he's concerned about that aspect?
First of all, the role of the European Court is actually very confined. This is covered in Article 8 of the treaty, but the role of the European Court is confined to the situation where if Ireland, if citizens give the government permission to authorise the government to sign up to the treaty, to ratify the treaty, I suppose is the technical term. The treaty then commits us to put into law the various items that are in Article 2 and 3 about how we should behave from the point of view of running the economy. Now, if we don't do that, it's then that a complaint, if you like, could be made and taken up with the European Court of Justice, which is often used as a vehicle in European law for settling disputes. But after that, it doesn't really have a function. The function is one for the Commission, and because Ireland is in a bailout, and even after we've exited the bailout, we'll be still, if you like, just getting back on our feet. A lot of those details won't actually apply to us for a period of time. And in the treaty language again, if he has a chance to read it or read some of the plain English guides to the treaty, what you have to do is to show sufficient effort to be addressing the structural deficit. So I can give you an example of what that might mean, say, in my own department. We're spending 20.5 billion on social welfare, including a lot of payments to people who are currently unemployed, including, unfortunately, a lot of young people. Now, what this, addressing the structural deficit means there is reforming the Department of Social Welfare and the money it spends in a way that that money becomes active in getting people back to work, rather than that it's passive social welfare money that says if you go on social welfare, gosh, you could stay there.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'd never even give you we'd never even phone you, never mind send you an email or a text message saying, Joan, how are you getting on? Have you had any success in finding a job? Now, we've launched a couple of months ago a programme called Pathways, and what we really want to do is try and ensure that as we reform the system, nobody is on social welfare unemployment benefits for longer than a year. Initially getting it down below, say, 21 months, then down to a year, because we're building up a lot of people who are long-term unemployed, and that's what addressing the structural deficit means, that we reform our system to actually make business more competitive, for example, or easier to set up a business, and in the case of social welfare, getting people back to work. And the other one would be, for instance, when our banks and our building bubble collapsed, we had a huge construction industry that was up to 30% of our economic activity. Now instead, since that's collapsed, of the 430,000 people or so who are on the live register, 100,000 of them come from the construction industry or retail related to construction. So if we want to get rid of that structural deficit, we want to get those people back to work, or as many of them as possible. In some cases that means they can no longer work in construction, they have to find a new field. So maybe a construction engineer or an architect goes and retrains, maybe goes into IT because they have a maths background and a spatial, knowledge background and so on. So that's addressing the structural deficit. So the structural deficit isn't technically defined, partly because it's both got a financial impact, but it's also about doing things to your economy that in fact help your economy to grow and to get into balance and to recover.
Okay, that's great stuff. Thanks very much, Minister Burton.
Thanks
for your time.